Everyone keeps saying Alex Eala built one of the most passionate fan bases in tennis. But what if that's not exactly what happened? What if the community was already there, and Eala simply became the person they had been waiting for? Around 262,000 Filipinos live across the New York area referenced in this story, including Queens, New Jersey, and Long Island. These are families, businesses, churches, and communities that existed long before Alex Eala became a name in international tennis. They carried their culture with them. They raised new generations around it. And they stayed connected to the Philippines while building their lives in America. Then Eala arrived. A 21-year-old Filipina, now ranked around the world's top 20, suddenly started winning on stages where millions could see her. She reached the fourth round at Wimbledon. She defeated defending champion Iga Swiatek. She won her first WTA title in Washington, and she beat world number 3 Jessica Pegula to do it. And something changed. The community didn't suddenly become Filipino because Alex started winning. The wins simply gave that community someone to rally around. Eala herself captured that feeling perfectly when she said, "I don't have a home tournament. So I'm so grateful that they made me feel like I'm home." That's a very different statement from simply saying, "I have great fans." She was talking about a crowd that made a tournament feel like home. And Washington gave us the first major glimpse of just how powerful that connection could become. On August 3, Eala faced Pegula in the rain-delayed DC Open final. Pegula was the world number 3. Eala was trying to win the biggest title of her career. Yet around the court, Philippine flags were everywhere. The reported crowd of roughly 500 created an atmosphere that looked remarkably different from what you would normally expect at a match involving a young player still establishing herself. Then Eala won. She became the first Filipino player to win a WTA Tour singles title. But here's the detail that makes the story more interesting. The emotional investment was already there before the trophy. Fans had shown up before Eala had that title. They were already carrying the flags, already following her, already treating her matches as something bigger than another tennis appointment. Even the reported surge of Filipino followers around Pegula after the final became part of the story. The woman who had just lost to Eala was suddenly being welcomed into the celebration surrounding her. That tells you something. This isn't simply about people wanting to watch a successful tennis player. It's about people seeing someone from their own background succeed on a stage where they rarely see someone representing their country. And that's why the Eala story becomes much more powerful when you stop calling these people a fan base. A fan base follows an athlete. A community recognizes one of its own. And the closer Eala gets to New York, the harder it becomes to separate those two things. Because the strangest thing about Alex Eala's crowds isn't simply how loud they are. It's how quickly they seem to recognize each other. Philippine flags appear. Families arrive together. Supporters wear the same colors. Phones come out. And people wait for Eala as if they're waiting for someone from home to arrive. That's what separates this from an ordinary breakout story. Usually a player wins, attracts attention, and gradually builds a fan base around the results. Eala's situation feels different. The community was already there. The shared nationality and heritage were already there. She simply gave people who already cared deeply about where they came from a reason to care about one tennis player. And you can see that progression across the American hardcourt swing. Washington was where the community gathered around her breakthrough. Toronto showed that the support wasn't staying in one city. Then Cincinnati made the phenomenon difficult for the tournament itself to ignore. Philippine flags appeared throughout the venue. Supporters stayed through sessions. and officials publicly noticed the atmosphere surrounding her matches. Even Amanda Anisimova, the player who eventually beat Eala, acknowledged it afterward, talking about how loved Alex is. That matters, because it wasn't coming from Eala's supporters trying to explain their own excitement. It was coming from the opponent who had just spent hours playing inside that atmosphere. And the flags aren't just decoration. For many of these supporters, they carry a much simpler message. That is one of us. Think about the generations behind that feeling. Grandparents who left the Philippines. Botkrents who built lives somewhere else. Children who grew up between cultures. Then suddenly, there's a young Filipina standing on an international tennis court, succeeding at a level where an entire community can see itself represented. Even Jessica Pegula became part of that story simply by sharing the court with Eala in Washington. The significance wasn't that every opponent suddenly became part of Filipino fandom. It was that the emotional investment surrounding Eala was clearly bigger than the scoreboard itself. And now the story reaches Flushing Meadows. Eala is arriving at the US Open with a title, a top 20 ranking, major wins, and dramatically more recognition than she had a year ago. More importantly, she's arriving in Queens, where that Filipino community is much closer to the tournament than it was at the previous stops on this run. Washington showed what happens when the community gathers. New York is where that community gets to gather closest to home. But there's a complication once you become the face of something much bigger than yourself. Eventually, you have to walk onto the court and perform while carrying all of it. And this is where the beautiful story gets complicated, because the Philippine flags can fill the stands. The chants can shake the stadium, and an entire community can believe in Alex Eala, but none of that can hit a forehand for her. Cincinnati proved that. Eala took the opening set against Amanda Anisimova and even led 2-0 in the deciding set. Then the momentum disappeared. The world number 10 turned the match around, and Eala's run came to an end. It was a painful reminder that Eala is still developing against the elite. A few points can completely change everything. But that loss didn't erase the Eala story. If anything, it showed how much the expectations have changed. A year ago, the question was, can Alex Eala break through? Now it's, how far can she go? And that's a much heavier question, because this crowd can be both an advantage and a burden. It can give Eala energy. It can give her confidence. It can make her feel like she isn't alone. But it also creates expectations. Every big win becomes a national celebration, and every difficult loss becomes a much bigger conversation. The crowd can make you feel 10 feet tall. It can also make every mistake feel 10 times heavier. And that's why the 262,000 figure isn't really about predicting how many people will buy a US Open ticket. It's about understanding the community surrounding this moment. Those people were there before Eala. She didn't create their identity. She didn't create their history. And she didn't create their connection to the Philippines. She simply became someone they could gather around. When Eala walks onto the court at Flushing Meadows, there will be Philippine flags in the stands, families watching from New York, supporters following from the Philippines, and younger fans seeing someone from their background competing on one of the biggest stages in tennis. She may walk onto that court as one player, but she won't be walking into that moment alone. She didn't build the crowd from nothing. The crowd was already there. Alex Eala simply gave them someone to gather around, and now, for the first time, that community gets to watch someone from home chase a grand slam in its own backyard.